Hey, I didn't think that would work. This is Pops with a little bit of a tutorial for some of you. I just got through working with a Husqvarna 125 BV blower. Well, what had happened was, this is what had happened right there. Fuel filter was on here, fuel line broke, it was a mess. So I start getting into it because I couldn't get the primer bulb to work when it crapped out. And I'm finding all kinds of discolored stuff in there. Outside it looked good. Inside the fuel tank it did not. Most likely this is ethanol. Especially when you see where a fuel line was and it turned white, that's almost certainly to be ethanol. Well, the other problem I had was, because the fuel filter fell off, I found an accidental replacement. I wanted to show some of you what plugs when all this goes bad. This is a typical carburetor from the past, not so much now. Why do I say that? Well, this part, quite often they have two screws now to hold this side on. And this is the fuel inlet, this is your fuel pump side, which transfers it to the metering side. Now on a lot of these newer ones, you'll see there's a dimple here. Well, someplace in the general area around here, they will put another elbow that's for the primer bulb. What's it do? It causes a vacuum here on this side and just draws it all the way across the pump body. Let's start here with the fuel inlet. We'll take the fuel pump side off. The fuel inlet comes into this hole. You say, what's this hole? That is for, pull this back in here so you can see it. There's two dowels that are built into the top on most of them, but not all. Dowel over here and one over here. This is your inlet here. On your inlet, as it was sitting here like this, peel it open. The inlet has a check valve here. And what it does is, with vacuum, it opens it up and fuel goes running in through, drawn up through here, and into this chamber. This side flops up and down like your diaphragm. Even though it looks rigid, that is your diaphragm that does the flopping up and down with the vacuum from the engine. Over here, where it comes over to this check valve. Comes up through and into the screen. Doing a double check, because sometimes there's something in here. In this case, no, there's not. So, the screen right here, I'm going to have to damage this one to get it out. You don't always damage them pulling out like that. Quite often, if you push them in there, they come out. But you try to get them out easily if you can. Sometimes a razor knife edge will do better. And what is it? It's a cupped screen. This is designed as your last catch. And this is what plugged on that Husqvarna blower. When the fuel filter broke off from the fuel line, then the screen plugged and no fuel went through. Now this one you can almost see through it even on here. The one I had in there on the Zama carburetor, you couldn't see through it except with a flashlight. So where does that hole go? Got a little brass seat down in there, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Now we turn the carburetor over. Remember where it was, over here in this corner, which translates into here, this corner. Now notice we haven't even gotten to the jet adjustments yet. We have fuel coming in, fuel pumped, fuel going over to the screen and pushing it through the screen when the metering side allows it. Essentially, this diaphragm on the metering side acts like your old-fashioned fuel bowl. That's correct. Because it's a diaphragm, not an open fuel bowl, it's limited. So you can turn your chainsaw in almost any direction. Still get it to meter properly. By the way, some of you might be asking at this point, well, there's a vent here, so this diaphragm can work on atmospheric pressure. How does this operate with vacuum? On this particular unit, let's see where it is. Well, this particular unit does it internal. Right off the stream. There it is. Right here. So that little port has a little hole in it, transfers over to here. And that's what will run your fuel pump on the internal side. Alright, yeah, that makes vacuum and pressure so it can pump. Runs it right through this hole. And that hole translates from here into here. So while you're pulsing on the front, where that boss is, as the piston goes up and down, it runs pressure in and out of here. So that little thing flutters. There's your fuel pump. It's not very flexible, but these do work and they're pretty resilient to bad fuels. Okay, now they're in that looking for that brass seat. Took the plate off. There's a diaphragm. The diaphragm works with atmospheric pressure here versus vacuum in the engine. This one's pretty specific. Now to get this off of here, you usually tear this diaphragm getting it off. You have to be careful because some of these are actually latched into the metering arm. Okay, diaphragm and contact pin always goes down. What does that contact pin go to? It goes to this little lever right here. This one sets, they set for, depending on the carburetor, they set for different levels. This one is just, there's two bosses, one little ridge here and a little ridge there. And you want it just so you have contact if you put something flat across that valley. Alright, what's in there? Well, this is where your brass seat's going to be, underneath that needle. Let me take that arm out of there. We're still following the fuel. We haven't gotten anywhere else yet. Okay, now some people take that screw out all the way out and some don't. What's underneath here? There's your arm and the pivot pin that the screw holds in. Here's your spring that works on the arm on the back side to close the needle valve. In fact, it may be hard to see, but that little dimple is where that spring goes. That fork is what goes on the needle. There's the little needle. The fork goes in here on that shoulder. And then that little tip right there, that V is usually a Viton tip or some other material. That's what seats down inside that hole. Let's see, that hole over here, that if you get it just right, you can see there's brass down in there. It's a brass seat for it. Brass is kind of a non-reactive metal from all kinds of other stuff. Now, it allows that, when it vacuum opens and closes that needle, allows fuel to come in here, pumps it until it's full, and then there's your idle jet circuit. No, yes it is. That was correct. That is your idle jet circuit. Fuel from this housing, this cavity, goes through that little port, goes where this plug is. It'll be difficult for you to see. Yeah, you see it there. You see the holes in the side of the cavity. So, oh yeah, I was running the choke. This is the one for the throttle. But where that little cap plug is, there's a couple of holes there. Trying to get it so you can see. Yep, there we go. It's going to be difficult for me to see what you're seeing because of the way everything's lined up here. But oh, there you go. The holes are in here. And as I open it up, there's more holes back there behind it. Your idle jet is the first one. The next one is off jet. You can't hardly see it. This one seems to have two holes in it. There's the idle jet, and then back in the venturi is another hole. Just before you get to, you saw that little brass plug in there. See if you can get a whisper. There it is. That brass plug in there. Well, that's this one. That's your main jet. So this little hole feeds through your adjusting screw, through here, and into your 2 or sometimes 3 jet openings for fuel, idle, off idle, mid-range, and then you go full throttle here into your brass screw. When there's enough vacuum and enough airflow, fuel will go through this larger hole, through a port into here, past this screw, and that's how they adjust it. The screw changes how much goes through the port to their plug. Now, so that you know, some of these are just a screen, and some actually have a ball and spring in there. So if you have bad fuel or anything else, it can screw that up and you end up getting another carburetor. We used to be able to replace that, but anymore carburetors are so cheap, nobody even worries about it. Now that's what I wanted to show you, is what goes on there. If that screen is plugged, it doesn't come through that little, there you can see it even, that little teeny metering hole. Well, I had it for a second there. Wait a minute. Whoa. But you can see that little teeny metering hole? Yeah, that light through there. It's a lot bigger on this side. So that's where you come up with the trouble when your filter fails, or you get some of the, even with these, sometimes the inside will come apart and actually flow up through there and plug that screen. Well, anyway, I thought I'd just show some of you people that thing. I've forgotten what this carburetor was for. Now the thing to do here, assembling this screen to put it back in there, you can clean it with brake clean. You can try and hang onto it as tight as you can. Just use a can of brake clean to spray it out. That's what I did on the other one. Cleaned it out very well so I could see the flashlight light through it. Now you open that up so that little bugger will go in there and stay. There's two ways to make that put in, or one of them is you can use a drill bit of the right size that's just a little bit smaller than that screen, so when you poke it in there it stays. Okay, it's staying, but I don't like the way it looks. There we go. I'm just assembling this so I don't lose the parts, and I figured, what the heck. Might as well take you on the journey as long as we've gone this far. Good enough, because once you get it in there, the gasket's going to hold it in place. This one I'm sure is going to need a kit. Alright, step one. Step two, these are stuck here, but quite often you do put them on here because there's nothing else on this side to be worried about but that. You back your idle screw off, but turn it upside down so the diaphragms are on the locating pin. It's a little easier to locate everything. Where it belongs. You have to open the throttle up just a little bit if you haven't readjusted the idle screw. And you say, well, you have to. No, you don't. You can let it sit against the dowels because that'll be more consistent anyway. While the saw is running, it's going to want to move a little bit. And that spring pushing on it will put it against the stops, and then you screw it to hold it tight. And later on, now you have both of your dowels and your screw holding that cap from turning. If you break off one of those dowels, is it critical? 1, no. 2, yes. Okay, this side is where the headache begins. This is what this. Let me tell you, this is where the fun is. Let me tell you. There you go. Drop that rascal in there. Drop the spring in there. There's multiple ways to do this, but the main problem is getting the spring to stand up. And if you get the carburetor at the right angle. Now, before I put that in there, I will put this. Oops, wrong one. If you have a magnetic screwdriver, you are golden. There's what I mean, too. Okay, just a couple of turns. Now, start this rascal in here on the spring. I push the pin across under the screw. And if I can get them all located the right way, hold that thing down, push the pin all the way across. Now it's in its slot. Oh man, I made that look easy. There's days you struggle with that stuff. Now before you tighten it in there, make sure everything's down and give it a snug. 2-finger snug. Thumb and your middle finger. You don't want to go wild. If you'll see in this case, you get a good look. It's flush with the top. We're good. This one we don't even need to measure because we haven't made any changes. Diaphragm, contact pin for the arm. 2 dowels here. Line them up. Your metal plate. Some of these actually go over the dowels, but most do not. Does it matter where that vent goes? 99% of the time, no. If you know which direction your carburetor goes in, try and put it on a lower side so that if anything falls in there by gravity, it'll tend to go past it and not in it. Does it make a huge difference? A few carburetors that I've torn apart and seen, it never stopped them, but if you have material in there, it's going to wear on the diaphragm, and I have seen that. Where the diaphragm ends here at the edge. If there's debris in there, that's the area it'll wear through. Doesn't happen often, but in the old stuff I used to see it because you get 041 steels that have been around for decades. They're 040s, I should say, that have been around for a decade or two. I come in and we're repairing them later on, 41s. Be a whole decade old or more. And there you go. Now you'll know some of these have aluminum around these adjustment screws. Some don't. Some of them have plastic on them to control how far they turn. That's up to you whether you keep them on there or not. In general, I defeat them because they want them running lean for emissions, but that lean is not good for the chainsaw. Now you saw the tools that I have here. You need a pick like this one, only sharper. This one isn't all that sharp. That's why I mentioned like a razor knife that you can get in there and pull that screen up. And that little screwdriver right there will handle almost everything. Generally, I have one of these around. It tends to fit. Now, the other part too is we're here. I use a narrow one all the time with a small top. We used to run into trouble with these things. When you bottom them out, that was way out there, wasn't it? It's the high-speed screw. But that's probably because of emissions. You bring it in until it just stops, and that's it. Don't go binding it. If it gets down here and it all of a sudden starts binding and you're forcing it, that means something's in there or you got a bent needle or other trouble. Bring it down till it stops. Now you can count 1/2, 1.5, 2.5, 3 was about what this one was at. Now the idle. 1/2, 1.5. That's it. Just stop. Nice, firm, don't force it, stop. 1/2, 1.5. Now when you're cleaning your carburetor out, I didn't take these out, but I'll show you. Some of them are identical in certain carburetors, and others are vastly different. And then others are basically the same at the tip, but the threads are different diameter, because there would be some funky little difference they want, or they have an option for somebody else's carburetor. Okay, now in this case they're identical in the size of the holes. And I just pulled out the low screw, and there's the high. They are identical, so there's no difference putting them in there. So if you make a screw up on some carburetors and you take your needles out and all of a sudden you're not sure which ones go in a case like this, make a few measurements, a couple eyeball checks. On the others where there is a difference, there'll be two different size threads, and you won't be able to mess them up. Usually the idle is smaller and the high speed is a larger thread. Back in, turn it, you're getting close to coil bind, stop. 1/2, 1.5. Now, are these accurate adjustments? I don't know. That's what I found them at. 1/2, 1.5, 2.5, 3. Why is this so many? In the old saws you'd see 3/4 or 1, and over here 3/4, 1, 1.5, and that'd be it, and occasionally 2, but usually it was 3/4 to 1.5. So we used to start with just 1 and 1. Well, anymore, I've seen these as low as a 1/4 turn, and these things 3 or more. Why? Well, for emissions. They're trying to get a very fine adjustment for emissions to get as much fuel through as they can, but right there at the point where it's going to meet emission standards. Well, anyway, there you go. That's Pops with his carburetor find for today. What was I working on? Well, I'm not gonna be able to turn it. But anyway, if you can see it, there it is. 125 BV blower. So there's your Pops tutorial for the day. Now I'll see if I can transfer this thing over to YouTube or wherever else. This is Friday, June 9th, I think. Yeah. The year of our Lord, 2023. Yeah, it's the year of our Lord. Let me tell you, it's the year of demons here in the United States. See ya.